Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep today into a figure who pretty much defines Renaissance man, Leonardo da Vinci.
Absolutely.
And you've shared some fantastic source material, specifically excerpts from Walter Isaacson's deep look into his life and work.
That's right. And our mission here really is to take this stack of information, all the details about his life, his notes, his projects, and, pull out the most important nuggets.
Get to the core of it.
Exactly. It's about giving you a shortcut, kind of, to understanding Leonardo, not just as the painter we all know.
The Mona Lisa, the Last Supper.
Right. But as the true polymath he was, engineer, anatomist, scientist, and maybe most importantly, just this relentless observer of the world. We want to help you see the whole picture from these details.
Okay, sounds great. And the journey, well, it starts right where he did, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In Vinci. What do the sources tell us about his very beginnings?
So he was born in Vinci, 1452. The sources, they highlight his parents. His father, Piero da Vinci, was a Florentine notary, a professional guy. But his mother, Caterina Licchi, she's described as an orphaned peasant girl. And they didn't actually marry.
Which was pretty unusual then.
Yeah, and Caterina later married someone else. So right from the start, his background wasn't exactly the standard stable family setup.
Huh. Must have shaped him somehow. Okay, so from Vinci, he heads to Florence. And this period, what is it, 1464 to 1482?
Yeah.
That's really defined by his apprenticeship, right?
Exactly. From about 1466 to 1477, he trains with Andrea del Verrocchio. And Verrocchio is a big deal sculptor, goldsmith, painter.
Oh, real master craftsman.
Oh, yeah. His workshop, it wasn't like some quiet little studio. Think more like a bustling hub of creativity and, well, making things.
And Leonardo wasn't just fetching coffee, I take it. The sources seem clear he was actively involved.
Definitely.
They mention him maybe even modeling for Verrocchio's David sculpture.
Right. There's a drawing that suggests that.
And those amazing drapery studies from the early 1470s, often credited to Leonardo. What's the deal with those? Why are they important?
Well, the drapery studies are just fascinating because they show his early, mastery of light and shadow, of volume, form, using just brush and paint on linen.
Wow.
It's a basic skill for a painter or sculptor, sure, but his studies, they almost look scientific, how fabric folds, how it catches light. You see his observational genius kicking in really early, even on stuff like that.
So it's not just practice, it's analysis.
Precisely. And this training, it feeds right into his contributions to Verrocchio's actual paintings,
Yeah, you mentioned things like Tobias and the Angel, or the Baptism of Christ.
Exactly. The sources point out specific bits where you can see Leonardo's distinct style emerging, often, frankly, better than his master's work, especially in things like landscapes or how subtly he renders figures.
And this is also when he starts doing his own thing, his independent work.
Yep. We start seeing paintings like the Annunciation, Ginevra da Benci popping up. Plus, he tackles that really ambitious Adoration of the Magi.
Though he famously doesn't finish it in Florence.
Right, that becomes a theme. But these early works, they show him really grappling with perspective, composition, how to capture a person.
And that preparatory study for the Adoration.
Oh, it's incredible. Just chaos, energy, figures, horses all over the place. It shows his mind just churning through these super complex arrangements even before he touches the panel.
And his observation skills show up in drawings, too.
Yeah, like figure drawings from that time. There's one called Nutcracker Man and Young Man from 78. It sort of hints at that deep interest in anatomy and human expression that becomes, well, a lifelong thing for him.
Okay, speaking of lifelong things, the next big move takes him to Milan, 1482 to 1499. And this is where his role just explodes beyond artist.
Totally.
He pitches himself to Ludovico Sforza, who later becomes the Duke, not just as a painter, but primarily as a military engineer.
That's such a key moment. It shows how strategic he was, even in selling himself. In Milan, he becomes Sforza's go-to guy for everything. Artist, sure, but also engineer, architect, even party planner for court festivals.
Wow.
And he connects with other brilliant people there, like the architect Donato Bramante, who became a friend, and the mathematician Luca Pacioli. They definitely influenced each other.
His notebooks from Milan are legendary, right?
Sure.
Mirror script, packed with ideas.
Oh, yeah. They are incredible. And the sources list this astonishing range of stuff he's thinking about. You've got these fantastical flying machines.
Like actual designs for flying.
Yeah, like a human-powered one, designs for hinged wings. Maybe some were for theater effects at first.
Okay.
But they show this deep, deep fascination with flight, with mechanics.
And then you flip the page, and it's terrifying military inventions.
Right. The scythe chariot is the famous one, a horse-drawn cart with spinning blades meant to just, cut down enemy soldiers.
Jeez.
He also designed giant crossbows, machines to push away siege ladders. It's such a stark contrast to the beauty of his paintings, but it shows the practical, sometimes brutal side of his engineering brain.
And it wasn't just military stuff, right? There were practical things, too.
Oh, definitely. Hoisting mechanisms, industrial designs like a machine for grinding needles more efficiently, and even conceptual stuff like trying to design a perpetual motion machine.
So what does all that tell us about how his mind worked?
I think it shows this relentless drive to figure out how things move, how energy works, how tasks can be done better, faster, stronger. He wasn't just interested in what something did, but the how and why behind it, breaking things down to basic mechanical principles.
You also see his interest in architecture in the notebooks.
Yeah, sketches, particularly for octagonal church designs. And he was involved in discussions about the cathedrals in Milan and Pavia. Plus, he's getting deeper into math and science.
That link with Luca Pacioli seems important.
Very. Pacioli was a top mathematician. Leonardo drew these incredibly precise illustrations for Pacioli's book on divine proportion complex geometric solids like the rhombic-octahedron.
Wow, say that 5 times fast.
Huh, right. But it wasn't just copying shapes. It shows Leonardo really understood the math, the geometry, and could visualize these abstract ideas perfectly. He saw that geometry everywhere in nature, in design.
And the anatomy studies really kick off in Milan, too.
Yeah, we see early skull drawings from 1489, studies of facial proportions. It wasn't just about making his art look better. He genuinely wanted to understand the structure underneath the skin.
But alongside all this technical stuff, the paintings from Milan are just iconic.
Absolutely. Virgin of the Rocks, both versions, Lady with an Ermine, that famous portrait of Cecilia Gallerani, La Belle Ferroniere, stunning works.
And, of course, The Last Supper, probably the most famous painting he actually finished in Milan. What do the sources highlight about that one?
Well, its location, for one. It's in the dining hall, the refectory of this convent, and he designed it so the perspective lines in the painting actually look like they continue the real room.
But
Very. They also mention preparatory sketches showing how much planning went into it. It's just a masterpiece of psychology, composition, perspective, even thinking about how sound would travel in that room.
it's also during this Milan time that Andreas Salai joins his household, right? The kid nicknamed Little Devil.
Yes. Salai shows up then, just 10 years old. He becomes this really central, if complicated, figure in Leonardo's life for decades. You see him mentioned in notes, popping up in drawings, sometimes as a model, sometimes just scribbled in the margins. Shows his place in Leonardo's day-to-day world.
And one huge project that took up a ton of energy in Milan was the Sforza Horse
Oh,
Monument.
the equestrian monument. Yeah, that was meant to be this absolutely colossal bronze statue of Ludovico Sforza's father.
Huge undertaking.
Massive. Leonardo did incredibly detailed studies of horses' anatomy, movement. The sources talk about his meticulous plans, not just for the sculpture, but for the engineering needed to actually cast this giant thing in bronze. It was a huge technical challenge.
A challenge that got cut short.
Yeah. The French conquered Milan in 1499 under Louis XII. The story goes that the massive amount of bronze set aside for the statue ended up being used to make cannons instead.
Ouch.
Yeah. So the project collapsed, and Leonardo had to leave Milan again.
So he heads back to Florence, 1500 to 1506. But it's a different Florence he returns to.
Oh, definitely. Politically, things were pretty chaotic, but he connects with some key figures, like Niccolo Machiavelli, the diplomat, political thinker. They actually became friends.
And he ends up working for Cesare Borgia, the warrior son of the Pope. That seems kind of intense for Leonardo.
It does seem like an odd pairing, but Borgia needed top-notch engineers for his military campaigns. So Leonardo worked for him as a military engineer and map maker.
That map of Imola is supposed to be amazing.
It really is. The sources mention it, Borgia had just conquered the city. Leonardo's map isn't just functional, it's incredibly precise, almost like a modern aerial photo. Shows his skill combining surveying, observation, and art. He also designed canals and this really clever, self-supporting bridge for Borgia.
This return to Florence also means Michelangelo. The rivalry heats up.
Oh, yeah. This is where it really kicks off. They're both commissioned to paint these huge battle scenes for the Palazzo della Signoria, the town hall.
Leonardo's Battle of Anghiari versus Michelangelo's Battle of Cascina.
Right. Neither survives in its original form, but we know about them from copies, like the one Rubens did of Leonardo's, and descriptions. The sources stress the intense competition.
And there's that detail about Leonardo sketching Michelangelo's David in his notebook.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Maybe a bit of grudging respect, or just, studying the competition. Hard to say, but it shows they were definitely aware of each other.
For sure. While he's back in Florence, he also gets a request from Isabella d'Este.
Mm.
Powerful woman, wanted a portrait.
Right, the Marquisa of Mantua. The sources mention a drawing he did of her, which is beautiful.
But the painting never happened.
Nope, another unfinished project. But what does deepen dramatically in this second Florence period are his anatomical studies. This is where we see some of his most detailed, most accurate drawings of the human body.
How detailed are we talking?
Incredible detail. Drawings of an old man showing his muscles, the heart and arteries compared to like a sprouting seed, looking at fluid systems, multiple layers of bone and muscle shown, detailed views of the brain, nerves, the spine, arms, face.
Oh.
And the sources net, you can see him getting better over time. Like compare neck muscle drawings from his earlier Milan period to ones from around 1510. The understanding is just worlds apart. He's doing repeated dissections, really observing. He even figured out how to make a wax cast of the brain's ventricles to understand their shape.
So he wasn't just drawing what he saw, he was trying to figure out how it all worked.
Exactly. Function, mechanism, that was key for him.
And then there's that moment in the sources that just stops you. Right there, mixed in with the science. The notes about his mother's funeral.
Yeah, it's really striking. Caterina died in 1493 while he was first in Milan, but the detailed expense list shows up later.
What kind of details does he list?
It's meticulous. Costs for candle wax, the bier, the pall covering the coffin, fees for priests, grave diggers, the burial license, even small things like sugar.
He lists the total cost.
Yep, 128 lire, 10 soldi. It's not just a quick note. It's a full financial record of a deeply personal event recorded with the same precision he used for, like, an engineering diagram.
It really humanizes him, doesn't it? Shows that scientific mind dealing with personal grief right there on the page.
Completely. It anchors him. Amidst all the grand ideas, there's this very real human moment.
The paintings from this Florence period also include things like the Madonna of the Yarnwinder, the Virgin and Child with St. Anne.
Right, and the preparatory drawing, the cartoon for the St. Anne painting, and studies for Leda and the Swan.
And the Salvator Mundi is often placed around here too, the one with the crystal orb.
Yes, the sources mention the Salvator Mundi here, that painting that's caused so much debate recently. And it's worth remembering the backdrop. The sources mention things like Savonarola being burned at the stake in Florence in 1498. He's living through turbulent times.
So from Florence, it's back to Milan again, 1506 to 1513. But Milan's under French rule now.
Correct. Charles d'Amboise is the French governor, and he becomes Leonardo's patron. And this is when Francesco Melzi joins his household in 1507.
Melzi becomes really important, right?
Hugely important.
Oh.
He was a young nobleman, became a devoted student, almost like a surrogate son. And crucially, he's the one who inherited Leonardo's notebooks and preserved them.
And the scientific work just keeps going.
Absolutely. More anatomy, that incredible drawing of the fetus in the womb comes from this period, and just extensive, obsessive studies of water, of fluid dynamics.
What was he looking at with water?
Everything. How water flows around obstacles, how it falls into a pool, turbulence, currents, eddies. He did thought experiments using siphons. He was trying to decode the fundamental forces of nature.
It's like he saw similar patterns everywhere.
Exactly. He also continued his detailed botanical studies. That beautiful drawing of the Star of Bethlehem flower is from this time. He saw connections between plant growth, water flow, anatomy, these underlying principles of form and function.
Okay, next stop, Rome, 1513 to 1516. Papal patronage this time.
Yes, his patron is Giuliano de' Medici Lorenzo, the Magnificent Son, and the brother of the new Pope Leo X. But honestly, his output of finished paintings really slows down here.
What was he working on?
Some practical inventions, like a machine for making concave mirrors, probably for starting fires or heating water using sunlight.
Interesting.
Painting-wise, you have the St. John the Baptist, which later got copied and controversially turned into a figure of Bacchus. There's also mention of a strange drawing called the Angel Incarnate, with sort of androgynous features alongside other studies like the Pointing Lady.
So Rome wasn't maybe his most artistically productive period.
It seems not, compared to Milan or Florence. Maybe the environment wasn't quite right, or his interests were just elsewhere by then.
Which leads to his final years in France, 1516 until he died in 1519. hosted by the king himself.
Yeah, King Francis was a huge admirer. He invited Leonardo to France, gave him the Chateau de Clou, now called Clos Lucé, near the royal palace.
What was expected of him there?
It seems Francis mostly just wanted Leonardo's presence, his conversation, his wisdom. He wasn't under pressure to produce big new paintings. He could focus on organizing his notebooks, reflecting.
And the art from this period.
We see these powerful, almost cosmic drawings, allegorical pieces, and especially the deluge drawings, these intense visions of cataclysmic floods, maybe reflecting on all those years studying water and the power of nature.
And then there's that tiny, incredibly human detail the sources mention, found right near the end amongst his math studies.
Ah, yes. The notes scribbled on a sheet with studies of geometric areas, right triangles, just says, the soup is getting cold.
Just perfect, isn't it?
It really is.
This
is mind wrestling with complex geometry and then boom, pulled back to the mundane reality of a meal waiting. It encapsulates his whole life, in a way. The soaring intellect grounded by everyday existence.
He died there in France, 1519. His death even becomes a subject for later painters like Anna.
Right, a sign of just how legendary he'd become.
Okay, we've walked through the timeline, hit the major works and periods from the sources. But there's one painting we have to talk about specifically, the one that kind of floats above the timeline and defines him for so many people, the Mona Lisa.
Absolutely. You can't talk Leonardo without talking Mona Lisa. The sources naturally discuss it.
Where does it fit in, roughly?
It seems to bridge his later Florence period and maybe into his time in Rome. He worked on it for years, carried it with him. The sources also mention related works like the copy in the Prado Museum in Madrid and a nude version sometimes called the Mona Vanna.
What makes it so resonant based on everything else we've discussed?
Well, it feels like a culmination of so many of his lifelong pursuits. That subtle sfumato, the smoky blurring of edges that comes from his studies of optics and light, the anatomy in the hands, the face that's decades of dissection, the enigmatic expression that's his interest in human psychology, capturing fleeting moments. And the landscape behind her feels like something from his geological studies.
So it's not just a portrait.
No, it's like a synthesis, an exploration of human presence, filtered through all his scientific and artistic understanding.
And one final point the sources touch on, what did Leonardo actually look like? Because there are a few different images out there.
Yeah, it's surprisingly tricky. You've got the famous red chalk drawing in Turin, often thought to be a self-portrait in old age. There's the portrait in Vasari's biography, the Lucan portrait, the one on the cover of Isaacson's book from the Uffizi.
And that Uffizi one has a twist.
Right. The sources mention analysis suggests it's probably not a self-portrait by him from his lifetime, but a portrait of him done maybe a century later. There's also a possible quick self-portrait sketch in one of his notebooks, so even pinning down his actual appearance involves some detective work.
Okay, so we've walked through this incredible life, seen the sheer range of his work documented in these sources. When you step back and take it all in, what really stands out? What are the main takeaways here?
For me, it's precisely that breadth, but seeing how interconnected it all was. He didn't just, paint on Tuesdays and design canals on Wednesdays, right? It wasn't separate compartments. For him, figuring out the mechanics of a bird's wing, or the structure of a human heart, or how light reflects off water, that was all part of the same quest to understand the world. And that understanding fed directly into his art and vice versa. Drawing was his tool for thinking, for observing, for analyzing across every field.
And the sources really bring that alive with those specific, almost quirky details we talked about.
Exactly.
The meticulous notes on his mother's funeral costs right next to scientific observations. That note about the soup getting cold during math problems. Seeing his anatomical drawings get better and better because he just kept looking, kept dissecting. The contrast between the guy painting the Virgin of the Rocks and designing, sized chariots. These aren't just trivia. They show this integrated, intensely curious mind at work.
Yeah, it wasn't just about being gifted. It was about this relentless, insatiable curiosity, always asking how. How does the body move? How does water flow? How does light work? How can we copy nature's designs and machines? It all stemmed from this deep, deep desire to observe and understand.
So, thinking about his approach, what can we take away from Leonardo today? How does seeing all these facets change how we think about genius?
Well, I think it challenges the idea of hyper-specialization, maybe. His genius wasn't about digging deeper and deeper into one tiny area. It was about intense curiosity across the board, seeing connections others missed, and using observation, rigorous, detailed observation as a key. He showed how exploring one field, like anatomy, could totally eliminate another, like painting.
It really makes you wonder, considering this incredible range we've seen in the sources, the deep science, the wild inventions, the art, and then those really intimate human details like his mother's funeral or the cold soup. What does that mix tell us about creativity, about genius itself?
That's a great question.
He left so much unfinished, right? Because his curiosity just kept pulling him elsewhere. You have to ask, what amazing things might he have completed if you just focused, say, only on painting? But then, what profound insights, what connections, what understanding of the world might we have lost if he had narrowed his focus like that? It really brings up that whole question of breadth versus depth, doesn't it? How do we balance exploring widely with digging deeply? It's something to think about.